Pokemon. This game needs no introduction. A hugely popular series that's still running strong since it exploded onto the scene in 1996. This game has a fascinating world, lots of characters, a simple but fun storyline, and of course, a battle and leveling system that keeps you coming back over and over again. This week, I wanted to talk about probably the most enduring aspect of the first generation of Pokemon games, the music. The music was composed by Junichi Masuda, who also helped program the original game and directed and designed most of the later games. He's worked with Game Freak since they started, and has contributed music to almost every game they've ever made. His influences vary from Stravinsky and Holst to Yellow Magic Orchestra, and he did all this on the Game Boy, which is a very limited system, having similar limitations to the NES, so Masuda had to rely on the same thing that many composers of the day had to: simplicity. And that's really the entire theme of Pokemon in general, simplicity. Granted, it can get difficult and complex if you get into the EVs and IVs, breeding, stuff like that, but at its core, it's a very simplistic game. You aren't trying to save the world, you aren't fighting the ultimate evil, you're not even becoming the best in the world. You're just trying to become the best in the region and to beat your rival. So on to the music. The first generation, versions Red and Blue, were released in 1996 on the Game Boy. The Game Boy's sound chip had 2 pulse generators, one PCM 4-bit wave sample channel, usually used for a sine wave, a noise generator, and audio input from the cartridge, although no cartridges ever used this. So there were 3 notes that could be played at any given time, just like the NES. So in addition to the simple world of the game, the music was, and had to be, simple. And this aids the melodies in being as singable and catchy as they are. Masuda said that he was inspired by Bach to create melody only using a few notes at any given time. Much of Bach's music is very simple, but Masuda is probably referring specifically to Bach's Inventions and Sinfonias, a series of keyboard pieces he created that either have 2 parts and are called Inventions, or have 3 parts and are called Sinfonias. Masuda was also influenced by Stravinsky, who is famous for his avant-garde music that was shocking at the time but became the basis for much of film music in the 20th century. Stravinsky's music is very intense and dissonant, with an emphasis on rhythm more than melody. This translates to Pokemon in many of the battle themes, where melody jumps around in different keys and instruments fly up and down chromatic scales. Masuda also grew up listening to Yellow Magic Orchestra, or YMO, a Japanese techno band from the late 70s and early 80s. They used a lot of synthesizers and had a driving tone that feels similar to game music in a lot of ways. So the distinct identity that Pokemon takes is because it's basically a mixture of Bach, Stravinsky, and late 70s Japanese electronica. An important facet of the music in Pokemon is the falling sound whenever you enter a battle. This is pretty common in JRPGs, but in Pokemon it is distinct in having the music flow into an intro while the Pokemon appear, and then into the main battle music. There are also 4 varieties of battle music: the Wild Pokemon music, the Trainer battle music, the Gym Leader music, Pokemon battle versus the rival music. Each of these are distinct and have a tone that flows right into the battle music. And then a unique victory theme, whether it's just a simple wild Pokemon battle or a difficult gym leader. Another interesting aspect of Pokemon is all the cries that the Pokemon make. Almost all of these cries are less than a second, and many of them sound pretty similar to one another, though there are some standouts like Ghastly, Hypno, and Zubat. There are 151 Pokemon in the original games, so some of the cries are more interesting than others, but there are a few things that I noticed while listening through them. In many cases, each stage of a Pokemon's evolution is the same noise, but transposed up or down a little bit. Also, the different Pokemon types and the appearances of different Pokemon tend to dictate the general sound. Bird Pokemon sound like chirping birds. Normal and ground types sound the most like actual animals. Electric types sound like electricity. And fire types sound like roaring fire. Now, one thing I need to mention. This soundtrack is great and iconic, but the music definitely improves over the course of the series. A huge part of this is the better sound quality in the future systems. The Game Boy Advance was leaps and bounds better sound-wise than the Game Boy. Also, Junichi Masuda definitely got more used to the usage of the Game Boy musically, so the second gen of music, despite still being on a Game Boy, felt much more full and better produced than the first gen. Second gen really is Game Freak essentially perfecting the formula from the first game, but many of the themes came from Red and Blue, and these are the themes that truly stick with you. It's also worth pointing out that all this music had an incredible face-up with the GBA remakes. All of the Pokemon games are great, and the music, especially the music from the first game, helped build the wonderful world of Pokemon to what it is. Thanks for watching, and listen well.